Weather derivatives are financial instruments that firms would use to hedge risk concerned with adverse weather conditions. The first weather derivative was originally traded by Enron back in 1997.
The United States government during the Vietnam War perfected weather modification techniques, and also they perfected releasing toxic chemicals like Agent Orange over many areas to defoliate land, trees, grasslands, and other areas.
And this was the U.S. military thinking that they might be able to control the monsoon over Vietnam during that conflict. And so only a handful of top-level military advisors and the president were informed that they were going to try to make it rain over the Ho Chi Minh Trail and try to have some military advantage by doing this kind of intervention.
When you start talking about manipulating the environment, we have treaties that go back to the mid-70s that forbid this, number one, as weapons of war.
So the perfection of weather modification took place, but it became apparent that using weather modification for wartime purposes was not acceptable to the United States government and other nations of the world. So therefore, the NMOD Treaty came into being and was signed by the United States government after passing Congress. The reason it was signed and implemented was because it would ban warfare, weather modification techniques and use during times of war.
They had domestic exemptions, and so does the Environmental Treaty, where you can do whatever you want in your own territorial boundaries. I mean, you start manipulating weather in one part of the planet, it doesn't look on the ground and say, oh yeah, wait, this is the boundary of a political boundary. It fails to recognize those. So you start to talk about geophysics and manipulating the planet itself. Then it's a question of those kinds of exemptions shouldn't even be allowed.
Incredibly historic sandstorms when we're invading Iraq, or you want to drought out or flood out a dictator that you're not happy with, or obscure a beach when there's a landing, or if you just want to make money on the future.
Environmental manipulation is like the ultimate method of covert warfare, because you can literally shut down food production. You can create a situation where the people within a country revolt against their own government, and you're invited in to mop up the mess. The issue of owning the weather by 2025, which is a military publication, we've quoted it as far back as, I think, 94, 95 even. But you go back to these earlier reports and you look at sort of what was the objective, and the objective is exactly that: control the battlefield environment. Environmental factors give you an absolute advantage. If you can weaken your adversary before you have to fire the first bullet, maybe you even win the war.
The biggest concerns of early cloud seeding, weather control activities by the General Electric Corporation came from their lawyers, who thought that the corporation was totally vulnerable to lawsuits, because if they started to make fair or foul weather, the people down below in Massachusetts or downwind of Schenectady could institute massive lawsuits that could put GE out of business. So the first response to weather control from their in-house lawyers was to shut it down, was to give the project to the military and ask them to do it, with the GE lawyers only being the consultants on the project. So they were allowed to suggest and design certain activities, but they weren't allowed to touch anything or throw anything out of the plane. One of the ideals of the Air Force is to have this all-weather Air Force, or to have their pilots coming back safely and using the weather as a salient against the enemy and clearing out their own airports from, say, from ice fogs or from bad weather. And so if the idea here is that if we can fly and they can't, that's a great military advantage.
Owning the weather by 2025, using the weather as a force multiplier.
There was also research studies on hurricanes that the scientists were truly curious about the behavior of hurricanes, but their military patrons were very interested in how to steer them or direct them in certain ways, almost as a guided weapon.
Ionospheric heating, in fact, these instruments, when they were first utilized, which is in the former Soviet Union back in the 70s, they started out, and they still call these ionospheric heaters, because in one mode of operation, you can literally create above this instrument on the ground, you can heat an area up to 30 miles in diameter in the ionosphere. So you heat it up, and by heating it, it literally raises it. So then imagine this column moving up several hundred kilometers out, and then the lower atmosphere begins to rush in and fill that vacant space, that void. And as a result, you're altering pressure systems for quite quite a distance, which of course alters the weather. You're also able, if a jet stream is coming in the air, you're able to alter its course. And if you alter a jet stream, even a small amount, then the swing factor on the other end, you can move it. So you're moving storms, say, out of the Midwest onto the East Coast, or this kind of thing, by just swinging it high in terms of its flow and getting it redirected. This jet stream that's moving across, and it shoots 50 miles north and then 75 miles east and then drops back south again, then kind of goes on its way. And they attributed that little dog leg in the jet stream in Alaska to swinging storm systems out of central Texas into central Florida, where they deposit a couple of tornadoes in the middle of Orlando that were like really rare to see in that part of the country. And so people remember that event and they remember that situation. But it'd be a good example of a very small change in Alaska in terms of a jet stream and what kind of lower 48 effect that would have. And that's again where weather modification, small input in one place can have tremendous change and unexpected outcome in another.
They want to create a storm in the southeast, then they'll start engineering out over the North Pacific. That's where the trailees will be, because you want to work out several days ahead of time so you have less input, and you multiply that over a couple of days, you can have a big result in 5 days' time. So small input upstream, big result downstream. And one of the rules is always work with what's coming. Don't try to necessarily work against it. You can kill a storm in place. That's easy to do with HAARP. You just change the polarization, you change the ionization of the atmosphere, and the storm will fall apart.
It will affect the setting up of the storm tracks, the jet stream, the location of the storms. And so you end up with an intervention on the solar side of things would pretty directly begin to affect the weather patterns. And so climate control, or attempted climate control, and weather control rely on this very large spectrum of intervention. It's also true that if you can forecast climate, you can control a lot of futures markets, and you could know if you had the best information or if you had some leverage over what the climate system is going to turn out to be, you would be able to invest in advance in all your crop futures and your agricultural activities, and not just agriculture, but weather affects. I think it's something like 80% of the U.S. economy is weather sensitive, and so all kinds of businesses would like to see some weather edge, some advantageous information that they would have.
It's absolutely entirely possible to profit from the weather.
My name is Michael Agney. I'm an independent trader, trading commodities at the CME Group, member of the Chicago Board of Trade, and have traded derivatives and futures cash for over 15 years. Weather derivatives are financial instruments that firms would use to hedge risk concerned with adverse weather conditions. The first weather derivative was originally traded by Enron back in 1997. Weather derivatives started in 1999 at the CME Group. Big utilities, reinsurers to hedge against hurricanes or tornadoes or flooding, some sort of catastrophe, hedging against a cooler summer or a warmer winter. Let's just say I was insuring a product for $5 million, no matter what it was. Let's say if I was a utility company, a farmer, whatever it was. Let's say I had $5 million worth of crop, but I can do derivatives that are worth double that amount, and I can control the effects to where I collect on the insurance that's worth $10 million as opposed to selling the crop for $5 million. Yes, I could definitely profit from that. 2010, 2011, Southern Illinois, Missouri, those, you know, we had a high peak of tornadoes and those types of adverse weather conditions definitely raised the price of commodities as well as drove the volatility, which also raises the price of commodities. You're going to make more money if a crop fails. You're creating insurance that's over the price of what your crop is worth, let's say. So if you can control the weather, you control how these products grow. And if you had an insight to how these products were actually seeded and what products you use to actually grow those items, corn, soybeans, and you can control that market, it's unlimited profit potential if you can control the weather.
If you want to send, cold into the Midwest, you buy up pipeline capacity, you buy up options on heating and cooling degree days, you buy derivatives off of rainfall. There are mechanisms that you can make hundreds of billions of dollars annually and defray a huge chunk of the cost of this just on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, playing with derivatives in the weather market.
Weather derivatives are basically, you're betting that there's going to be a weather disaster, and you're betting that it's going to occur within a particular time frame in a particular location, and then, the money that you put up basically is like a bet. It's like a wager, saying that this incident's going to happen here, and then when it does happen, There's a big payoff. And that big payoff is something that motivates people to continue to participate in this kind of thing and maybe even feed the very process that's causing the bad weather to happen. Particularly if there's a connection between the people that are seeding the clouds and the people that are making investments.
This is a new opportunity. It's a new tool for investors. You know, even if someone has no interest in, going on the offensive side and buying things, it definitely behooves them to be aware of what's going on out there. The extreme weather is here, and it's not going to reverse itself. The weather event has to be severe.